Good evening. My name is Jenna Birch, and I am the Director of Alumni Relations at Westchester University. Thank you for joining us for the WCU 150 History and Heritage Exhibition Lecture and Tour Series. Before we begin, I would like to let everyone know that our next lecture and tour will focus on women's and gender studies. So please save the date for next Tuesday, February 22nd at 7:30 p.m. and register online at wcualumni.org. You can also find the complete list of upcoming lectures on the Alumni Association website and recordings of previous events. Please remain on mute until the end of this presentation, at which time you will be invited to provide feedback and questions related to the subject. For the best experience, we recommend having your viewing screen set to speaker, which will allow you to view the presentation in the largest format. This can be found on the top right-hand corner of your screen. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Museum Director, Michael D. Giovine.
Hi, thank you, Jenna, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Michael D. Giovine. I'm an associate professor of anthropology here at Westchester University, the director of the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, which is located in Old Library. And of course, we're going to be visiting an exhibition that's in the Francis Harvey Green Library, and also the director of our Museum Studies program. I wanted to give a couple of words before we introduce our guest speakers and take the tour of the WCU 150 exhibition. Just a couple of words about what you're going to see and how this all came together. So this represents the capstone course or project for the Museum Studies program. We host one of these student co-curated exhibitions annually. Typically it's in Old Library in the museum, but we have an Earth Day exhibition up there that was postponed from the pandemic. And so we were fortunate enough to be given space in the library. Students in the program, they do some theoretical studies, conservation and collections management studies, and then finally this capstone, which is curating from start to finish this exhibition. Typically I'm there with them in the room, but unfortunately I have to be at home for a little outbreak in my house today. So we're in great hands here with a student co-curator, Julia Zahm, who had a big hand in doing a lot of things in the exhibition, as well as her own parts on abilities and disabilities at Westchester. So the way that this works in the study in the class is that students, we kind of come up with a big idea, we come up with a design and a concept. And for this, it was a little bit complicated because there's definitely, we're taking direction from a lot of different sources because this is the capstone of this sesquicentennial celebrations. And on the one hand, we wanted to make this timeline so that alumni such as yourselves, when you'll see this, can follow along the room all of the development, the transformations of Westchester University, from its origins as a normal school that was teaching high school aged kids how to be elementary school teachers through the roaring 20s, when we were the state teachers college, to the 60s, this tumultuous time when we were a smaller liberal arts college, a comprehensive liberal arts college, and then of course in the 80s onward when we were the Westchester University, the largest of the 14 PASHE schools in the state system. But at the same time, we want to do deep dives into a lot of these kinds of themes that can show the transformations and the intersections of diverse cultures over time at Westchester University. And primarily they focused on the one hand, academics and research, and those are the two cases in the middle. Then there's student life and culture, and which includes sex, gender, sexuality, race, diversity, and inclusion, clubs, military, athletics, and then what am I missing? Oh, diversity and inclusion is its own one. So, and then diversity and inclusion. So with those here, we have this great intersection of discussion on gender and sexuality. And so today's topic, of course, we're really excited to have our guest speakers. We'll be talking about the queer experience, the LGBTQIA+ experience. And so we're really pleased to have two Great speakers today joining Julia on this tour of the exhibition. We have Meg Panichelli, Associate Professor of Social Work, and she specializes in feminist and anti-carceral, queer and intersectional theories of oppression in the School of Social Work. And we have Professor Jacqueline Hodes. She's a professor in higher education policy and student affairs in the Department of Education Foundations and Policy Studies. And especially Jackie has been integral in really working with the students, including another student co-curator who couldn't be here, Maddie Maychek. She had to work today. They wouldn't let her get the day off. It was really upsetting, actually. To help work with the artifacts. She lent us a number of artifacts, as well as several of you here in the audience. We're really pleased to have Spencer Pyle and others who have also loaned us artifacts for this exhibit as well. But Jackie's held many positions since she started at Westchester in 1986. So that would have been, yes, that is the Westchester University era, when she started in student affairs as a director of alcohol and drug education. And most notably, she was integral for 18 years as coordinator for LGBTQA Services, and she continues to serve on the advocacy committee. So I'm going to turn it over to you all, but I think, we wanted to start out even before, doing the tour, that we're going to talk in terms, semantics are important, terminology is important, and we were going to talk about our theme today in terms of the queer experience at Westchester University. Can you maybe give us a little bit of information about that and why we're choosing that term to use?
Yeah, why are we using queer?
Well,
No, I think Jackie and I were talking about this, and I'm an alumni of Westchester and was a part of the student group when I was doing my undergrad. And I think that was the one time when the name for the student group was changing. And I think it was LGBTQ.
Maybe.
Yeah, and then I think maybe we added IA. But as language evolves and changes and identities we try to be inclusive of more and more identities and cultures, and they're like this alphabet soup that I think often gets talked about when we talk about queer experiences. And so we thought, for the sake of time, instead of listing out LGBTQIA2S+, every time we were talking about changes throughout history or moments in history, that we would stick to queer. And we know that queer is also a loaded term for people of different backgrounds, ages, generations, and histories. And at this point, we've just decided that we're using queer to kind of encapsulate a broad experience of
Sure.
our communities.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Julia, why don't you take us on a little tour? What do we have here in this exhibit?
Sure. So right here we have our Philip Sess. Philip was our second president at Westchester University when it was still the normal school. He served from 1881 to 1920. He's known primarily for, besides being an amazing president, also having the Phillips collection of autographs here at Westchester University. But also at this time period, we weren't seeing too much in terms of diversity and inclusion, both amongst faculty, students, staff. So I was wondering what you guys thought about, that time period in regards to the queer community and just gender in general.
So, but for the purpose of the folks that are on the Zoom call too, we wanted to just let you know that Meg and I spent some time trying to prepare about all these artifacts, and we just decided we were going to have a conversation and hope that you were happy listening to our conversation about all of this. So that's how we're kind of approaching this, maybe in a little bit of a queer way. I don't know. We talked about that too, but we're just hoping that it'll just generate itself with conversation. And of course, we prepared some questions that Julia has. So the answer to your question from my perspective, and again, all of this memory and conversation are certainly our own perspectives and own personal memories. But at this period of time, we would say it's non-existent. And we have thought that we should move kind of past this, which is certainly we know that there were queer people on campus, both students and faculty and staff, but we imagine that it must have been very complex for people because there was no coming out. People didn't talk about this, certainly in 1871. There might have been some pockets where people were talking about it, but it had to be a very, very complex time for people who were identifying as queer, even if they let their own selves know it. I don't know if you want to say.
Yeah, is that weird?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Yeah, I was just teaching a social work class, and so I'm talking about this kind of time period in social work and the beginnings of social work in the US. And I think that when like helpers or kind of people who were involved in charity or were doing what we would think of as social work would run into people who might be queer, lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, et cetera, they were very often criminalized and seen as sick or as having disabilities or being able to being able to be reformed and into something that's not queer.
And I'm looking at, this is a gym outfit from right around 1890. And it does have a skirt, and it makes me think about, how like sexuality, especially in concerns of women, was very heteronormative, very modest. Do you think that, that definitely had an impact, especially on how women approach their sexuality at this time period, just like on these like sort of social norms and conformities that they had to fit in?
Yes, I mean, I don't think that people could have a choice, or if they even thought that there was a choice. I don't even know that. I mean, I'm sure people did, but I imagine there are people who didn't even have the conversation in their own heads. And you know what? I believe that's true for some people, even in 2022, that they don't give themselves the freedom to even say this is what's happening. But certainly in this time, very complicated.
Okay,
cool.
Sure, I would just say too, just to add in my own 2 cents. I mean, this is the era in normal school. I mean, you had the white balls, right? You dressed up in tuxedos and white ball gowns. I mean, you're expected to come, you dress up for dinner in certain ways, in Old Main. I mean, this is a time period where you really, the conformity is also pretty strong. I mean, you have this as well. I mean, and just talking about reformers, I mean, one of the neat things, this is a little off topic, but one of the really neat things of doing this exhibition, and we were on a lot of Philadelphia area the television news and stuff like that. We're getting a lot of people would write us, did you know about this? Did you know about that? We actually had, in this period of time, there was somebody, a young woman who I think she probably only did the 2-year program, and then went off to be a missionary in India. So she was, in that kind of the reforming mind, she was one of those social kind of social working missionary people. And she ended up having to come back to Westchester because her parents were sick, and she came back on the Titanic and perished on the Titanic. But I mean, this is the period, we were producing, missionaries as well, and other people who were social advocates, but again, in a certain perspective, right? Not the kind of same kind that we would be today, maybe. Yeah.
So right next to our Phillips desk, we also have our signed Frederick Douglass autobiography, which is very important. This was Westchester University at the time, not Westchester University, but the normal school was actually the last place that Frederick Douglass spoke before dying about 17 days later. We were also one of his last autographs, as his check was signed, and unfortunately, I don't believe it was actually cashed before he did die. But this time period also saw, the opening of this idea of diversity and inclusion within our school, which is obviously extremely important, especially nowadays where everyone sort of feels even more separated, even though we're always connected. But then right next to this, we have our first Black student graduate, who I just wanted to point out because I love this so much, but it's from 1910, and he sits right above our gender and sexuality case, which features of quite a few items from you as well, that just sort of display our queer identity within Westchester. And I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts was on all of this memorabilia.
So it's amazing, really. The whole case is very fun. And so much of this was donated by Spencer Pyle, who served on the alumni board and was the president for a while of the Safe Space Alliance. I think there's some of my artifacts in there too. But thanks, Spencer, for everything that you donated here. There's so much to talk about in this case. I'm not even sure where to start. Do you want to say anything?
Well, I don't know if you want to know some of the statements on the pins that are in this box right here.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
They're just it's really exciting to look at. I'm just getting to see this, so it's cool. There are a lot of pins in here, and so one of them says, "Women deserve respect, stop the violence now, women unite, take back the night, keep abortion legal," and then there's a hanger with a line through it. "She who laughs lasts. She who laughs, lasts." Yeah, and so there's so many things, and then there's these stickers. There's the Human Rights Coalition campaign, and then the ally sticker, and then the other ally sticker here. There are different iterations of the ally program. I mean, there's so much to comment on here. I don't know how much.
Absolutely. Do you want us to talk?
Yeah,
about
I would love to
the
hear about the
program?
ally program.
So it's a long story, and
We got time.
but we only have 45 minutes, and there's so much to tell. So we'll get around to this when we get to the other side. But in 1992-3, a task force was formed at the university, and that's what created the LGB Concerns Committee. And that was when I got involved being the quarter-time LGB coordinator. And one of the tasks that we had was to create an ally program. So this was the early 90s, mid 90s. And that's what we did. And we didn't really know what we were doing necessarily, but we knew that it was important that people who were allies be identified, so that queer students would know who they talk to that might be a safe person that they could talk with. Because you couldn't just tell, right? You can't just tell about who's an ally, who's queer. So we created this and we gave people a sticker. And really at that point, we were preaching to the choir. We had people who were kind and wanted to be helpful, and they came. And then after a while, we did a really good job, and people were becoming more aware and wanting to participate in ally training, but they didn't always know what they were being allies to or for. And so it took a lot of different iterations, this training. I think Lisa Huebner's on the call, and I know that she had a lot to do with the transforming the training that we did. Ron Mader, Jen Bacon, so many people. This whole thing took a village, and we're going to miss people in acknowledging their contribution. So that's why you see these different iterations of stickers. And now really we've gone to the other place where I don't think we're giving out stickers anymore in our training. We're doing different kinds of training, but this was a moment in time when it became an intervention that I think was really important for students, faculty, and staff. I remember students saying, when I walk down the hall of the 5th floor of Main Hall and I see all the ally stickers, I know that's okay for me to be out. And that's I get goosebumps just thinking.
And I actually have a follow-up question for that, because I know, as with any stereotypes, people always get this preconception idea in their head of what someone looks like, what someone acts like. When you say with allyship and everything, is part of that making that distinction that everyone is the same, it doesn't matter what our gender is, what our sexuality is, we're all in this together. Not to quote High School Musical, but we are. And I just wanted to, to hear your thoughts on that if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think with allyship, it's really always a work in progress. And no matter our identities or social categories that we fit into and our experiences, we can all be continuously working to be better allies, or to not even identify ourselves as allies, but making that a practice. And that's important for any social movement, for any movement against oppression, right? Because we can all be in this together, and we all enter from different places.
It's important for people to know that there's somebody there that can be helpful to them. And I also want to make sure that I acknowledge Starla Gable, who's on the call. I was going to talk a little bit more about her contributions as we got further along. But what was amazing was that we had celebrated, I think, our 35th anniversary. And there's some memorabilia here about that, especially this one, which is so funny to me. It says, if homosexuality is a disease, let's all call in queer to work. Hello, can't work today, still queer, by Robin Tyler. And I still laugh at that because it's so funny. But we had written up something in the alumni magazine about the event. And the next thing I knew, I think I got a call or a card from Starla, who had graduated in 1973, and she said, I really want to help. And so she did. She helped by giving her support. She came to campus, she talked to all of us. She came all the way from Washington State to visit with us a couple of times. And then she financially helped us with the Ally program, because you can imagine, even at that moment in time, the LGBT advocacy and services weren't well funded. Even the student group wasn't as well funded as it is right now. And so we really needed her help, and her mom also helped with that. And it was so great because it gave us some seed money to expand and to do some more programming. So Starla, thank you. I know maybe you'll want to jump in and maybe we can do that closer to when we talk about the graduation and everything that happened in the 70s too. Yes, go, yes.
I think, like, also to your question before, I started at Westchester as a transfer student in 2002, I think, spring of 2002, as an undergrad transfer student. And it was the first time, I mean, it feels like not that long ago, but also long ago. And it was the first time where I was like, there are adults around me and professors that are queer or gay. And I can remember, like, how much should I talk about you, Jackie, and everybody, but first I'll say that, like, I can remember just anywhere I was that there was a faculty member's office and there was a sticker with me, and I can remember, like, a friend that I would always be with. Do you think they're gay? Do you think they're an ally? Do you think they're gay? Well, either way, they're like cool with us, and it just feeling really actually nice to see that. And it feels, I can remember that really deeply. And also, like, anyone that I knew on campus or anyone that I met on campus that was queer in some way, we all had to be like, have you met Jackie Hodes? Have you met Jackie Hodes? Even today, I was at a friend's house doing this thing with Jackie, and they're like, oh my gosh. And it's just really cool, I think, to be a part of this conversation and to think about all these various, like, phases we've gone through.
Well, we talked about how important it was for people to see people who were queer on campus. We talked last week, as we were preparing for tonight, about how we both have intentionally made decisions to come out in our classes so that students can see that. And I remember when Lisa Milhouse came here, and Rodney Mader and Jen Bacon, all people who have been so instrumental in moving all of this forward. And they had to make a decision to actually say, I'm coming out. And thank goodness, because it took a village, and little by little by little, as people claimed their identity and spoke it, we were able to create a culture that said, we're here, right? We're here, we're queer, et cetera. And it made a difference. It was a small grassroots, so that when people came in, they would just come in and be queer. It was fine. And it's certainly been an evolution. And it wasn't that long ago, really, when we think about it. Like, we're looking at the first Black student graduate in 1910, but Meg's story is only from 10 years ago. Yeah. But 20. Right?
Yeah. Everything happened so closely together, we all were like little specks in a great big world. It's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah,
But
where are you taking us next?
I was gonna take us to 1936 specifically to talk about Bayard Rustin, who came here, and he wasn't out at the time, as far as I'm aware. He didn't really come out until very late in his life, you know, due to all of the sensitivities and being born in the time when it wasn't accepted, especially as a young Black man who was also in the civil rights movement. But I was just wondering if you had anything to say about him.
So, well, he was a behind the scenes kind of person, I think, at least my understanding of him, but a mover and a shaker. So he grew up here in Westchester, and he was, you know, there's lots of naming opportunities for him. There's a whole high school named after him. We have a lot of programs, scholarships, things like that named after Bayard Rustin. But he was kind of behind the civil rights movement to the March on Washington. He was, but because he was queer and he often was marginalized. And so I think he kind of took it back. I'm not a Rustin scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know that he did a lot to work with Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists to really help in that moment.
Yeah.
There was a story you were telling me about coming back from the Million Man March, or the March on Washington. I'm not sure if it, and then I can't remember if you were.
Oh, it wasn't that March on Washington, but yeah, I can tell that story.
Okay.
I could tell that story. So I think it was 1992, actually. So it's
Okay,
more on the other
it
side
was
of it.
the
But it
end.
is, a bunch of the students in the LGB, I can't remember what it's called, I don't, GLSU maybe at that point, went to the March on Washington in 1992. And of course it was 1992, so people weren't that out, but they were very empowered. And that's really when there was this whole incident that happened that really was racial in nature, but students had an opportunity to speak their voice in the Asplin auditorium about all kinds of campus climate issues. And the students coming back from the march were so empowered by being at something like a March on Washington that they got up too. And it was incredible really in 1992 because people were coming out in front of a 1,200 person theater that was filled with people and students talking. Yeah, and so but that transformed it because that conversation, their willingness to get up and to do that created all of this. That was the beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of civil rights movement, we can move on down to the 1960s era. You know, the 1960s, a lot of civil rights movements happening, both amongst race, diversity, but also there were the Stonewall riots, which obviously would have had an influence across all of America. But I was just wondering, what would have been the influence in Westchester of just the civil rights movement in regards to the queer community?
I honestly, I don't know. I mean, we're so close to Philly and New York, and I can imagine there being, I mean, smaller iterations or smaller groups of people really coming out and like engaging in activism at that time.
Yeah.
But I don't know really anything about that.
Right. I mean, we're not scholars,
Yeah.
but what we do know is that this was a moment in time during the civil rights movement that I think queer people felt more energized to say, wait a minute, this, you know, we want some rights too, because all this time that, and I know people on the Zoom can't see this, but we're in this room and we're a wall and a half in, people didn't really have a voice. So everything was really happening behind the scenes. But of course, there were gay people, there were queer people all over campus and all over the world. And so my guess is there was some inspiration. And then when there's something very public, then people say, hey, wait a second. And so, yes, and at this moment in time, we were seeing things like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Politis. And I think I was talking when I was in here earlier with Mike, talking about Barbara Giddings, who really was right in Philadelphia and Wilmington, who was really a civil rights activist. And there's many, many photographs of her and others marching right in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, protesting for gay rights, as it was called then, because you know, homosexuality was considered a disease in the DSM. I don't know if it was DSM-3 then or what it was. So it was classified as a mental illness, certainly against the law in many states until very recently as a result of walk around here. So it had to have been a really tough time, but a budding time for people. So I'm sure there were things happening in pockets.
Just nothing quite as big.
Not like how it is now.
Yeah.
And if I could interject just or ask a question. So, you know, we have what we're looking at right now on this wall. We actually, these two things to the left are Black Student Union, all the presidents of Black Student Union, and then a very important newspaper clipping from the Quad that features Larry Dowdy as when he was the president, you know, of the Black Student Union when there was a cross burning on campus. And I know, you know, obviously this was something that happened periodically at Westchester, the borough, up until I think the 80s. I mean, and also at that time period, of course, there was a little bit of tumult, you know, between different groups. You have the hippies, you have the different African-American organizations. The president at the time wasn't really very keen on integration in the same ways. You know, was there, so what I'm hearing is we don't really know, at least, you know, right now. I mean, what was the kind of the experience like for the queer experience in the early 70s, late 60s? I mean, it was just, I mean, I'm sure they were also joining in these protests and sit-ins and things.
I imagine so, but I also, you know, really want to invite, I don't know if Starla wants to unmute and participate a little bit, because I think her perspective, right, she was here during that time. And so Starla, you know, we talked about it, but I don't want to put you on the spot. If you'd like to unmute and just share your experience, that would be certainly helpful.
I don't mind doing that. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, so I'll just make this story generic, but I was at Westchester from fall of '69. I graduated in 1973, as Jackie said. I was in Valkyrie, which some people may know was a women's physical education major service club, did a talent show every year, which was a fundraiser for some developmentally disabled activities that the Valkyrie gals did with, I can't remember if it was at the Y we did swimming, but anyway, we were contributing back to the community. But I remember a specific incident that will stick with me forever. Two gals in Valkyrie got caught making out in their dorm room. They were both excellent basketball players. The coach, basketball women's coach at that time, found out about this incident and decided not to put their names forward to try out for the United States Women's Olympic basketball team because of that. And there was a huge conversation at one of our Valkyrie meetings. And I am ashamed of myself that I sat at that meeting and pretended like, you know, I wasn't involved in what they were being accused of when I was a lesbian myself. And you know, as you look back, you think, oh, well, that teacher was a lesbian and that teacher was a lesbian, and wow. And that's the atmosphere that we lived in. So those of us who were testing out our sexuality, you know, we sort of pulled back and thought, oh my gosh, something's not right about this picture. So I have since, I'll just a little quick footnote. I have since run into that. One of those two women was here in the state of Washington at a basketball tournament at the University of Washington. I waited outside the locker room to see her in person and apologize face to face for not standing up for her at that time when we were students there at Westchester. So.
Wow. Yeah, Starla, thank you so much for sharing that story, because it's so personal, but I think that it actually helps us understand from a personal point of view how complicated it was at that time, and that you were so frightened, and that these two young women didn't want to be caught, right? They weren't out there the way students might be today. and they were trying to have a private moment in a really scary space. And of course, it was hard for you to speak out. And I hope she received you with good grace. And
yeah, I really felt like we made amends, and
Yeah.
I feel really good about it.
I'm so glad, and you know, we're so glad that you reached out to us to tell that story years ago, and having reconnected with you is just lovely. And
Well, you know, it's sort of the basis of why my mom and I decided that we would support the program. I mean, it's exactly, I mean, if that program would have been going on when I was a student there, my whole life would have been different than it is. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Very welcome.
Very powerful. So I think that kind of says a lot of what was happening.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to say it.
Well, I would just say, yeah, thank you so much for that history and that story. And basketball has been an integral part of my life at Westchester, for those who don't know. But since I was like 11, I've been coming to Westchester to play basketball on the weekends and in the summer, and spent a lot of time with the coaches and players over the years, since the 90s. And I mean, I know that the last two coaches and the last few coaches that they've had, you know, and that's just since probably the end of the 80s, you know, I think I've grown into more welcoming people and like affirming people, queerness, and then just the other thing that I've been like thinking about as I'm looking at the displays is that I think one thing is, or you know, it's always important to remember, is that Westchester is a predominantly white institution, and so a lot of what I think our memory is or holds like has to do with some of the experiences probably of white queer people on campus. And I'm thinking, as I'm looking at like different events that were happening between the 70s or in the 70s, I'm just like curious actually about like the intersections of gay rights or like gay movements and anti-racist movements, and how that, like, if there were alliances or coalitions.
I don't know. It feels like maybe not, but you would hope maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so glad you made that.
And I just noticed something because from your story, you mentioned it was in 1972, and just 3-4 years after that, the Gays of Westchester became, you know, founded.
Yes.
And it's like, that's such a short amount of time that people, you know, went from nearly like being expelled for it to being in the newspaper and saying, I'm here and I'm proud of it. You know, what would you have to say on that?
So, so interesting, very good segue, right? Because what's very powerful is this moment right here when the Gays of Westchester is founded. And you have to just think about how brave these people were, because they were in a residence hall, Wayne Hall, which coincidentally, my office is on the same floor where they met in 925 Wayne. And they had this meeting in someone's residence hall to say, we need to do something. And there were a number of people there, somebody named Tim Anderson, I don't know if Tim's on the call, and then also Beth Baker, who since had passed away, was in that space, and she was an ally, and they formed this Gays of Westchester. And that was the beginning. And again, it had to have been so brave, because now the picture here, that maybe, I don't know if the folks can see it, but this small group of students had their picture taken to be put in the yearbook, and had to have felt very risky, and they had to have just been standing in their integrity to do that. And that was the start of what has happened since. So we're always grateful. Up on the 9th floor of Wayne, for those of you that may not have been on campus for a really long time, we've been able to dedicate that office, and there's a plaque outside that talks about that. That's where the Gays of Westchester was founded. And then we have a really nice picture of Byron Rustin right across from it. So,
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah, it's a nice memory of that.
And was there anything, you know, you mentioned 1992 was when the LGBT, you know, coalition essentially was founded. And was there anything that happened between this 1975 and 1992 era?
Well, lots happened.
What's happening?
Lots happened.
You're right.
Yeah. Well, on campus, what happened was, the group kept moving along, and different people came in and out. It was always pretty small, and there were some very significant student leaders who led the group, and again, always small, but they were consistent. And
Yeah.
I don't really know what kind of programming they were doing, things like that, but they were meeting, and just their presence, that they had to fill out some kind of reservation form. And this is happening in the old Sykes Union, so I can tell from the walls. And again, that happened for a long time. When I arrived in 1986, there was I can't remember if the group was called the GSA or the GSU or something like that. And I was not out at the moment, but they found me. Their radar was right on. And, I was excited to be found, but I wasn't ready to come out until maybe the next year or so. But they were doing great things. I remember the first year I was there, the president's name was Dave Morse-Addition, and I think I remember this student, Mike Robinson, was involved at that time, maybe a little bit later after I came. But he was such a fabulous programmer and advocate. And I remember there was a Ramada Inn at the corner of 1 and 202, and they had a whole reception there, and Mark Siegel from the Philadelphia Gay News was the speaker. And this was 1986, and it was really, again, I continue to use the word brave, but I think it was very brave. And committed to provide these kinds of opportunities.
And I don't have any.
Because I was just gonna say, because you're talking about bravery and how much courage it takes to do something like this. But unfortunately, with all bravery, there are going to be people who hate them for being brave. How did they react to people, not enjoying them for being who they are, for being their true, authentic self? It's a hard question. I know. I just did it. I didn't know how to.
Yeah. Well, there's no different in 1986 than there is in 2022. Unfortunately.
I think all of the context matters, right? Like being in Chester County, being, I don't know, at the Westchester State College.
State College, 83. So I guess both periods.
I think that there's a lot of complicating. I think there's a lot of different types of issues, even, just, I don't know if it's random or if it's just the discipline I'm in, but just thinking about as a teacher's college, like how, how stereotyped gay men were as being like sexually abusive towards kids, and like that may impact someone's career, right? Or like how they decide to move forward, how they get to be themselves, or like be role models for young people who are
And there weren't a lot of images of queer people on TV or media, certainly, or there wasn't a lot of representation. So, but I, credit these folks for representing, right?
Yeah.
They did, and they really started what became, so many people came in, students who were willing to participate and to stand up. And it was always, again, a small group of people, maybe when I came for the first 10 years, a small committed group of people, but who were willing to say, I'm here and provide this opportunity. There's so many people to thank along the way.
I know, obviously there are a lot of great moments within queer history, but like for me, I'm 25 years old, so I've only experienced a very small amount of them. But, one of the biggest things I think about is when gay marriage was legalized in the USA. And like, yeah, I know, I'm like skipping it. Because it's just, I keep thinking about it, we're mentioning, being brave, and that is just 40 years, difference between, the gays of Westchester being founded to gay marriage being legalized and everyone being allowed, to go out, have their families, be happy, live their life as they want to live. You know, and I was just wondering if you guys saw anything, you know, on campus that reflected when that happened, when everyone was like, you know, no one can stop me, I can get married, there's gonna be a ring on this finger, and no one can stop it.
Well, that was certainly a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Gay marriage, but I think that some of that energy happened. That before things were legislated. Right? So I do believe that there became a collective voice, and more and more people said, okay, I'm out, I'm willing to come out, and I'm willing to support gay people, you know, as allies or whatever. And I think people said, I don't want to be quiet anymore. And that's really, to tell you the truth, my own personal story. I was so lucky to have a role model here, Mary McCullough, who since passed away. She was the director of affirmative action, and she was a professor in communication studies and social work. And she was also the director of the Women's Center. And when I came here in 1986, I decided, you know, I'm tired of not telling people what's going on. And I think I have a video on this video thing, and I told Aaron that when I first came here in 1986, I went to meet with some folks, and they said, how do you like it in Dykes Union? And I thought, ooh, I'm in a scary place, if that's what they're calling the Dykes Union. And that's why I stayed closeted for the first year and a half that I was here. But then I said to somebody, I can't do this anymore. And they sent me to Mary, and Mary said, why aren't you coming? And she was out here. And I said, okay, I will. And I'm so glad I did, because it wasn't just me, but I'm glad that I did, because I've had a long career here and I've been out the whole time. And yeah, and you know, I hope I've helped other people do that. But other people came and said, I'm going to do the same. And there's many, many people along the way that have been instrumental in creating the culture we have here at Westchester. So much so, and I know we're going to get down here in a minute, that we have, I believe, the first center that's called the Center for Trans and Queer Advocacy, and we owe that to T. Gray, or Tiffany Gray, who came here a number of years ago and really had the vision to say, we need to lead with trans. She was able to really see what was happening. So grateful. And before her, Anissa Smith, when I left the position, came in and moved this to the next person. And that's what's happened. Person after person has said, how can I move this to the next? And it's taken the proverbial role. I don't know if you want to speak of it.
Oh my gosh. No, I think that's, I mean, it's so important to, like, I don't know, if it's legacies or like just like the evolution of different people that have come in and that have moved the like culture here farther. And I think a lot of the activism that has been done.
No, yeah. They want us to pay a lot of money for this trip.
Oh, maybe don't.
Morocco in May. And I'm like,
yeah, so I think
right,
that like
maybe.
Jackie has influenced a lot of people. There are a number of other
I'm like,
factors.
oh, you're overdue on
Like I think
your
we're
trip, and I'm like,
learning from one another and really like moving forward. And also I think you know, I think that with with faculty and students and staff, there's been so many different people that have contributed to like the movement and the growth of like what feels like to me affirmative environment to be a queer faculty member. But I also just wanted to say, like, in thinking about the activism.
that's my group.
There. Oh, I'm sorry. Just that, like, there, you know, have been many movements and queer movements, like that I think many folks who are scholars of queer studies and queer history that look to and that we've all been influenced by. And I have to say, like, I wasn't here during the time when gay marriage got legalized, but I was in Portland, Oregon, and had just actually published an article about like gay marriage not being the answer to like equality. So it was like, hey, like we can build families in lots of queer ways, and we don't have to be married to do it.
Mhm.
But also like holding at the same time that for so long, it was something that many people wanted, and it felt like a significant moment for a lot. Like
It was wonderful. The band go.
So important to realize that it wasn't what, I mean, people were waiting for it so that they could have, but not everybody, right?
Yeah, not everyone.
And not because they don't want to necessarily be seen by the United States as having a valid marriage
Yeah.
and having all the protections, mostly economic, that come with marriage.
Mhm.
But, yeah, so it was an interesting moment. I remember having these discussions in the student group about should gay marriage be legalized or not. There was some fun discussions to take both sides.
yeah, and just like being so close to Philly and New York, and activists like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson in the 70s, who were doing this like very grassroots organizing and like collective shaping of organizations and services for young queer people who are living on the street, who were living with HIV and AIDS, who were using drugs, who were sex workers, who just needed other people to like be with and to have somewhere safe to live, were like really instrumental, I think, in our, I think, in queer movements in ways that like we don't always recognize, but that still are working on to address systemic issues and social issues impacting LGBTQ folks that are still in existence today. And like, we still have to work on very, very.
Yeah. So.
Can I interrupt you all? This was such a wonderful conversation. Unfortunately, you had frozen, and then all we have is Joan's, the black with Joan's name on it. Maybe Jackie, my student, maybe you can like zoom in. I just sent you the link. Maybe zoom in with your phone or something, and maybe just to, and then close this one and turn it back on. Something's frozen, something's stuck with it for the entire conversation you had, which was so great. We couldn't see anything. Let's see. Oh, I see you now. Yes, great. Great, thank you. Sorry about that.
What did you miss? What did people miss? Oh, this brilliance here.
No, it was wonderful. No, we all heard it. We just couldn't see it.
You just couldn't see it. Well, we're just standing here, just not, like you said, having conversation.
So, you know, one of the things I wanted to ask too, while I have you, is, you know, when you and I went around, Jackie, I'm not to go back to the cross burnings and all the other terrible things that were going on campus, but there was an allyship going on, right? There was the lemonade stand. What was that all about? And am I getting the facts wrong? What's going on with it?
Well, this piece down here in the early 70s and the lemonade stand are 20 years apart.
Okay.
But what I can talk about is about that Project Lemonade, and maybe, I don't know if we want to move a little bit further.
Yeah, we can move down.
But I do, before we move, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Charlotte Bartlett, who was in the social work department and was the first advisor to these gays of Westchester. And again, talk about someone who is willing to step up and say, this is something that I will do in a time that people probably had a feeling about. Okay, so let's take, do you remember the lemonade stand? A little bit, the gays fine by me, sure.
Yes.
So, you know, from time to time, so we see Dr. Adler's picture up here, first woman president, came in 1992, and even before 1992, we would have people come on campus. We're a public institution, and they could put their feet down on our campus, and they could proselytize, really, and in that conversation had lots of horrible things to say about lots of people, especially gay people. And that continued every once in a while, and they would be around. And of course, you can imagine that somebody speaking these kinds of things brings a crowd around, and students would crowd around, and there'd always be a lot of debate, yelling back and forth, et cetera. And it caused a lot of angst because some of the images that these folks would bring and the kinds of things they were saying were just inflammatory and very, very complicated. And so the student group really, and Spencer, I think, is on the call still, and he was probably involved, I think, involved at this point, and this continued for a long time, decided that instead of standing there and screaming back and trying to not have a winning argument because there was no way to win, that we would try and figure out how to do some things to get them to go, but to also do things positive. To do that. And so I was telling Mike that I read an article about in Reading, Pennsylvania, when the KKK marched through, people decided we were going to make lemonade out of lemons. And they asked people to pledge a certain amount of money for every minute that the KKK marched through Reading. And they raised a lot of money. So if they marched through it for an hour and you pledged 5 cents, somebody do the math, right? And so we decided that we were going to do that here at Westchester. And I had seen an article also at Duke University, I think it was, where they made these shirts that said "Gay Fine by Me," and students were wearing them. And I emailed them and said, "Can we take that idea?" And they said yes. And an alum from Westchester, his name is Leo Hughes, graduated in 1989, made those shirts for us for $5, and we sold them for $5. And we sold so many of them. But also we did this Project Lemonade. And so faculty and staff and students would pledge, when any of these speakers came, they pledged this money, and we took that money, we put it in our programming fund, and we did good things with it for students, really positive activities. And then someone made us a lemonade stand, looked like a little Charlie Brown, Lucy, 5 cents help stand, and we would drag. Remember that being in the office? It was so heavy. But someone would say, "They're on campus again," and the students would drag the lemonade stand out. And then we eventually sold pretzels and food and Gay Fine by Me shirts, and we actually raised a lot of money and pulled attention away from this really hateful rhetoric. You want to talk about that now?
I mostly remember the Gay Fine by Me shirts, and I remember like being very, very excited. I just kept saying, they were only $5.
Yeah.
They were just $5. Anyone could get one. And then, years later when I came back for grad school, I saw someone in the hallway wearing one. Gay Fine by Me. And it's just,
It was such a great thing.
yeah, they were, I think, like really great campaigns.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know if we want to let Spencer say anything, if he's still on the call and he wants to unmute, maybe share a little bit of his memory. I don't know if he's still there.
Actually, for me, it was the lemonade stand came after my time. So,
Oh, did it? My goodness.
so although I think it was awesome, it was a fantastic idea and a great way to deal with it. But yeah, when I graduated in '97, we weren't doing that at that point. So.
Yeah, but when Spencer was the president of the student group, that's when they shifted this the language to be from LGBT, or it wasn't T then at all, but LG maybe, to Safe Space Alliance. And it was a moment in time when that became a really, and Spencer, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but it was a moment in time where we needed that language to pull people in. And then there was a moment in time where we didn't need it anymore. And we needed to actually say these words: lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer.
Yeah, that was our big thing was, well, let's just bring everybody in. This was during the whole ally program and all that stuff. And we wanted to be able to include them without getting into, the huge alphabet soup that we did for a while. And we felt like, at least when I was there and with Dr. Adler, it was a matter of, I should be able to walk in the door and we should be able to talk about any topic. And then, oh, you're gay? Oh, okay. It's no big deal. It shouldn't be a big deal. But it was about being included and blending in more at that point than it was about being visible. And unfortunately, now we're back to being visible again because we need to. And I put in the chat window that I'm basically doing that on our corporate campus right now with
Mhm.
our diversity, equity, and inclusion. They asked all of the people in the Open Pride Committee if anybody would be willing to be on camera and talk about, you know, their experience at Bentley being out at the company, and no one else would do it. I was the only one out of probably 2 to 3 dozen people who would actually sit down on camera and talk about my experience at work. And my discussion was basically that we need to be visible to let them know that we deserve to be here. So that's my experience.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Yeah, I mean, again, so much happens between this time and this time, that we could do another 2 hours here.
Yeah.
Pull so many other voices.
But I mean, one thing I would like to mention, because I just know we are like entering that hour mark, because we sort of, talked about how the T wasn't there yet. The, trans needed to be first. And, I've seen it definitely on campus with gender neutral bathrooms, a lot more open people, not really looking at, what a biological sex means, because biological sex isn't your gender. Gender is a social construct. I can go off on that, but I won't. And, but, in regards to people who do fall under, T or non-binary or queer, what sort of changes have they been able to see at Westchester, especially recently?
Very good question. I'll give a little history and then I'll turn it over to Meg. So I remember very vividly sitting in room 132 Main. Lisa Huebner's on this call. I know she'll remember this too, where we really thought about what are we doing? We're not including the T, and we don't know a whole lot about T either. And just because we were the gay and lesbian and bisexual advocacy committee, we hadn't really thought about that. And so collectively as the group, we set out to educate ourselves, and we brought in a couple of speakers. I think at that point Adele Sholok was here, and she was the director of the Women's Center, it was called then. Lisa Huebner had come, Simon Ruckty had come. We had some new faculty who were really challenging us to think about this concept of trans. And so we began to understand it more. This was many years ago, really, when I think about it now. And then we included the T and decided we're going to do what we can based on our resources. And then we had a very similar years later conversation about the Q. And the Q was a little bit more, the queer part was a little bit more complicated because there people had feelings about that word queer, but we knew that we needed to put that in there, and people came along. But I want to think, Lisa, you may want to unmute and share a little bit, but I think that we put the Q in 2010 to 2012 as I was leaving my position. I don't think it was that long ago, really. So I don't know if you want, and if Lisa wants to jump in.
Yeah, Lisa.
Lisa, you there?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're putting you on the spot.
I'm putting my child, helping him get ready for bed. Listen. Much for the amazing. And it's actually, Meg, I want to tell you, Patrick was watching. And, yeah, and he was just like, oh my God. I'm like, do you remember Meg? And he said, yes, So yeah, so of course I wanted him to hear this history, right? I don't remember the exact date, Jackie. Yeah, I don't, but I do remember the moment. I remember talking about that, and I remember how we made a subcommittee, and there was this definite moment in time where we were, I hope, speaking truth to power in that way. So yeah, this is so special. I'm going to unmute myself now, but thank you so much. This has been really
thanks for contributing. And so fantastic. I want your question about the bathrooms, because we often think about, trans and gender issues around the bathrooms. And I do remember, again, sitting in 132 Main, when we said, where are the single occupancy restrooms? Well, there's a lot on campus, but they were all labeled men, women. Yeah, but there was one toilet in there, just like at your house. And so one of the things that we did was we tried to do low-hanging fruit to try and make change that way. And we sent a student, I can't even remember who, around campus to take an inventory of where were the single occupancy restrooms and how many were there. And there were 36. And we had a lovely person in facilities, his name is Tom Clark, he's no longer here with the university, who was able to price out how much it would cost to just change the signs, right? So that they would say bathroom or restroom, whatever. And I think it cost $5,000. Don't quote me on it, please, but it wasn't a lot of money.
And it was worth it.
And it was worth it. And then we began to really do some advocacy because we were able to create policy, which of course then affects so many more than just the restroom, to say that any new building or construction on campus would include at least one single occupancy restroom. So if you go to the rec center, there's a single occupancy restroom there. And now in Wayne Hall, where Gays of Westchester were founded, every floor I think has 6 single occupancy.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing because I am there and I'm very happy that they are there. Yeah, but just as, it all starts and it can change like that. People come together and get behind it.
I mean, it's like a painting, it all starts with one brushstroke, one change on a campus to cause, huge widespread change.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if you want to, it was small but big, but.
yeah.
I mean, totally. I mean, and I think it's interesting because like I think when I was here in undergrad and I left in 2005, and then all this time, like there's been so much work happening on the T and like movement forward. And then like maybe there's been like, been done, like different types of projects have been done. And then there's just new people that are also coming in and bringing their ideas and their work. And I don't know if we're up till today or not, or.
I think we're getting close.
Oh, yeah, I would almost ask more if there's anything else you wanted to include, about today.
Yeah, so much. I mean, I think that, change is so important,
Yeah.
right? And the people that have come into Westchester just keep moving the needle as society continues to be more accepting. And so it's been great to have students come in to say, wait a minute, what about me? What about mine? What can, where am I and what can I do? And the whole time knowing that, again, there's so many students here, I'm sure, who are struggling, that don't want to come out, don't know, can't come out for all kinds of reasons. But we've created what I think is not, necessarily a panacea, but it's a safer place. I think we do have a fairly warm campus climate. There are pockets, believe me. Dykes Union happened in 1986, and in 2002, I moved into Sykes Union in an office, and I had a whiteboard and I had Jackie is, out, whatever, it was kind of like a student affairs-y thing. And somebody wrote Jackie is a dyke. And, that was in 2002. And there's still these kinds of pockets where there's this intolerance. But we've been so lucky that people, again, have been brave and willing to move the needle. I don't know if you want to say more about what's happening now.
Yeah.
Caucus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot right now in the LGBTQ
Caucus.
Which is made up of mostly faculty and staff. We have been working in different subcommittees, looking at like health policies and pronoun changes and preferred name policies on campus, and like a lot of stuff has been happening really quickly. And I think a lot of that influence is really from the CTQA and the leadership there. And then this the student group that's now called Sexuality and Gender Alliance, and they have I don't know if you're involved with that or not, really, or you're a grad student.
I'm a senior.
Sorry.
So close, but I am.
So then there's the Saga, and then there's Shades of the Rainbow, which I think is a subcommittee on Saga. No, that's sorry. But for BIPOC queer students, and there's just constantly like there's so much movement. And I think one of the things that was really important, early in the 2000s was the programming that was happening was like a good mix of political and activisty and social. Like it was like kind of everything. It felt like a lot of what all kinds of people wanted. And so it feels like that continues, and there's just new and like more innovation. It's really exciting to see and be a part of. Yeah.
We were so fortunate to have, there was a gentleman who worked on the staff in student activities, Steve McKiernan, who really did bring in, like some of the books that are in this case over here. He found the most amazing speakers, and they would come at a time when people weren't talking about gay necessarily. And it was fascinating. There was a lot of log cabin Republicans I remember being here. Cleve Jones, who founded the Names Project, AIDS Memorial Quilt. I can't even remember all the people we had. We had the quilt here a couple of times. That was very powerful.
I think I saw it. I think I took a picture of it.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I was like
Yeah.
so scared to touch it. So I'm like, I don't want to do or anything.
But so all these little pieces have added up to where we are today. And again, there's people behind all of these that are moving these things forward. And that is, I've been so impressed since I left my role about the growth that's happened just in 10 years. It's been extraordinary. And these very talented directors have taken the work into places that I never could. Certainly with my own identities, I never would have been able to do the work that they're doing now, which is really responding to what's happening on college students. It's meeting the needs of students, faculty, and staff. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. You want to turn it over to have any questions or comments? Yeah, we went. That's okay. That's fine. This was a great conversation.
Oh my gosh, we took a long time, but
I think we did amazing. I mean, I'm not gonna self-congratulate too much. I enjoyed this conversation a lot.
well, it's been really fun. I hope people enjoyed it out there. I can't believe I just said it, we've been here 2 hours, but we've been here. I think the clock's wrong, but we could spend another, evening again talking. Yeah. There's so much to talk about, especially down on this. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's so
Thank
fun.
you for coming.
Sure.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, friends, for being here.
Yeah. Any comments, or we're good? Spencer, I wanted to ask you a question about Spencer. Is there a way to go back to the case, the exhibit? Can you tell us about the painting?
The painting.
It was during I was at Westchester twice, let's say. I caught mono in between. So I was 90 to 92, and then I was 95 to 97. And this was done in my senior year as part of my senior project. I was an art major. So being the president at the time, I desperately needed to express myself. During my tenure in the group, we were fortunate enough to take a bus trip down to see the last full assembly of the AIDS quilt. And it was such a moving experience for me that it carries with me today. And I feel this is my homage to that. It was probably one of the most profound and emotional experiences I ever had. And when I truly felt the love for my LGBTQIA brothers and sisters that day, because they had to hold me up. It's a very long story, but let's just say in 36 hours, I had maybe had 2 hours sleep. And it was so beyond profound that this was my expression of that.
Great, thanks. I knew there was a story in there about this.
Yep.
Wonderful. Yeah. Does anybody else want to share anything? Well, I know everyone's tired. It's a late night. Thank you so much for coming. Jenna, you want to close it for us, or?
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and a huge thank you to you, Michael, Julia, Jackie, Meg, for a great presentation. And please save the date for next Tuesday, the 22nd, for our next tour, which will focus on women's and gender studies. So thank you all again for joining us for such a great event, and we'll see you soon.